right, so welcome to this Tyke webinar on solving fintech issues one API at a time. So my name's Matt. I'm a product evangelist here at Tyke, and I will be moderating today's event. And I'll introduce the other players as well shortly. First, I just want to go over what we're going to cover today, how we're going to cover it. It might be a little different than you're used to most webinars. We'll do an intros and format. So I'm going to kind of tell you who's going to be participating from our side, and then we'll go over the format of what exactly we're going to look at. Then we'll look at what are the challenges faced by fintechs. And I know many of you are either within the fintech industry or interested in getting into it. What we did was we did a fair amount of research and looked at some of the commonalities. And what we've done in part two is set those out so that we can see and have nice discussion around each of those and look at it from an API management perspective. And hopefully you'll be able to chime in as well and give us your take on it. And lastly, we're just going to do an open floor discussion and have, we're all friends here. Let's have a discussion and tackle any questions, concerns, comments you may have. Yeah, and that's going to be our agenda for today. So who is here? As said, my name's Matt, product evangelist at Tyke. Josh is also here, Josh B. He's not feeling overly great today, but he's going to do his best to be here for everybody. And then we have Travis, who's also on the call in North America as a consulting engineer here at Tyke. So what I said previously was that we're going to be looking at a few things, and I said it's going to be a little different than most webinars. So first, we're going to look at the issues. We're going to look at an issue, then we're going to look at some opinions and solutions, and then we'd love to hear your comments and maybe even some of your opinions and solutions on it. The main goal today is to make sure that everyone walks away with at least one or two new things to apply in their API management, API development journey within the fintech realm, or hopefully you can apply some of this stuff outside of that as well. Okay, now let's look at what issues we're going to be looking at today. So number one, we're going to be looking at securing data. Then we'll look at securing access to APIs. Then we'll look at scaling. So some of these things, what you'll notice already is that they're kind of applicable across many different areas in terms of they may apply to fintech and they may apply to basically every other industry that's out there. But we're going to try and look at it specifically from a fintech perspective. So we look at scaling, and then lastly, we're going to look at adoption, and that could be product adoption, and it could also be API adoption within your industry itself or within your company. So let's get started with number one. So thoughts on securing data. And we're talking about securing data possibly on the wire and at rest. Obviously, from an API management perspective, we're probably going to be looking more at on the wire or during transactions, but we can also talk about it at rest as well. And we'd love to hear some of your thoughts on it. So without further ado, Travis, I know you've been kind of looking at this over the last little while. What are your thoughts on securing data?
Yes, thanks, Matt. Yeah, securing data is very critical. We take that very serious here at Tyke. So with all our Tyke components, we do support and have full support for TLS and SSL. So as data is moving over the wire, it is doing so in a secure fashion. Additionally, speaking towards some of the specific components that we support, Tyke relies upon Redis DB and Mongo as well. And we support SSL connections to both of those components. So anytime data is moving through Tyke, we do support secure transport protocols so that data can't be snooped. So definitely something we support.
So I would say that securing data, and hopefully there's some other folks that will agree with us, is that when you think about the vulnerabilities within the fintech industry and how companies tend to lose reputation, it's usually something to do with a data breach and securing that data. Now, we have a few participants. We've actually got quite a few participants. Is there anyone who might have a comment, a thought on this, something that they'd be able to share in order to deepen our knowledge and deepen the other participants' knowledge as well? I'm sure. And Josh has also joined. Josh, thanks for joining.
Hey there, Matt. I've lost my voice a bit today, but I'll try and push through.
Sure, we appreciate it. Any thoughts at all on securing data within Tyke, securing data just in general, some thoughts around that?
I come up with this most personally when we're talking about like clients with PCI DSS requirements. So requirement 7 on PCI DSS is all about restricting card data to people who basically are in the need to know. Simply, that tends to just kind of boil down to like good transport security. In terms of like API management, because we're kind of like the plumbing that kind of sits in an organization, as long as you've got like an understanding about where the responsibility lies and making sure that you're using appropriate cipher suites and things like that, then you can get a lot of that done quite quickly.
Cool, awesome. No, thanks for the input. I see Andrew Rice has been promoted into our conversation now. Andrew, do you have some thoughts on this that you'd like to share?
Hi, Matt. Yes, I work for Vonage, and what we do is APIs for voice, video, and SMS communications, amongst a lot of other things. And one of the key aspects I'm looking at is API secrets management, or certificates, whatever it is you want to use as your authentication mechanism and tokens in there. And what I'm interested in that is how we're looking at securing those tokens, looking at zero trust. So can we trust the token? How do we know if it's being misused? I'm thinking that there's going to be a future around some sort of AI system that's going to look at it, just like we have with IDS and like a dark trace, but looks at the anonymous use of API keys what looks like normal usage of them, and how you then interpret when APIs are being misused through the keys that are being compromised.
Cool. No, that's a very good insight. Very good insight. So with that being said, Andrew, I hope you have some more input for us as well as we're moving through. And if anyone else has some feedback, I actually can't see the chat. Actually, I might be able to. Let me see here. No,
yeah, we did. We've got a question and answer too. I can let you know whenever you're ready.
Sure.
But Gregor just raised his hand, so I'm going to let him jump in the conversation.
Sure, that would be great.
Hi guys. So yeah, API security is something that's top of mind for us. So we're in a financial service institution inside a bank, and dealing with all of the things that go on within banks, regulatory environments and requirements, etc. So securing data is always very pressing, very top of mind. There are things that are easy to do. There are things that are more difficult to do. There's holistic things in the environment that stretch beyond the remit of the gateways themselves. And just as Andrew was saying, the secrets management kind of thing. So the bank has strategic tools that it likes to use in this space, and finding integration points and making sure that we can adapt and hook into those is something that really needs to be worked on as well within the delivery of the API ecosystem. So yeah, the ease of integration, the hooking into all these processes and trying to remove the friction from the publishing of the API, obfuscating them and making them just part of what the offering is key to making all this stuff really successful.
Yeah, agreed. Now, I do also have some Canadian banking experience within financial. Now, for us, I know a concern for us was, when planning out these systems, when looking at your entire suite of maybe usually within a large organization, may have many different groups producing APIs, and trying to get that data secured kind of the same way uniformly across the organization is quite hard. One thing that I can say after joining Tyke and kind of going into that API management mindset is being able to see how certain tools can allow you to do that more quickly than necessarily implementing that, directly or right within the code itself. And I mean, a great story, I can't tell you what bank it was from, but we did have an audit kind of sweep through and come and look, and it was the biggest piece of feedback was, you have a lot of unsecure protocols and some very secure protocols kind of mixed in. How do you track that stuff? And because we had everything not under what I'll say like one dashboard or one pane of glass, it was very tough to audit. And that's one thing that an API management solution, from an API perspective at least, can really assist you with, is allowing you to see your entire suite of APIs, and knowing that you can easily identify what types of authentication and data security are there, and then allowing you to easily adjust that stuff and flip it in and out. Now let's go, we're at almost at quarter after. Let's go to issue number 2. And thanks again for jumping in, both of you. If I can get this to work, let's see. There we go. Okay, so kind of similar, instead of just securing data itself, let's look at actually securing access to APIs. How do we, put our best foot forward in terms of maybe choosing what type of security we want to use? Are we going to use OAuth? I mean, for all the applications that I've done, we've always used OAuth, so I can't really think of anything else that may be applicable. But let's pass this over. So making sure the right users have the right access. What kind of stuff can we talk about and learn from this? I'll let Travis go first, and then Josh, and then whoever else wants to jump in is welcome to kind of give us maybe some of their stories around maybe some of their wins and some of their losses in terms of securing access to APIs. Travis.
All right. Oh yeah, thanks, Matt. I'll speak about securing access to APIs from the perspective of what we support in the product. Like you said, OAuth is very heavily used, but you can use OAuth in combination with other security methods as well. In Tyke, we support bearer tokens, HMAC signatures, support JOT. So if you want to use JSON Web Tokens to secure and govern access, we can facilitate the usage of those as well. So it really just depends on the use case and how secure you want to go. And any of those methods that I did mention, those can be chained together as well. So you don't have to be used in isolation.
So I guess what we'll do then is we'll open the floor. Gregor, any opinions on your side in terms of strategies maybe to making sure that the right users have the right access, and even from an authentication perspective outside of the authorization, what's a good way if I'm starting if I'm just jumping into fintech based on your experience with, I think, RBS, right?
Yeah.
Based on that, what should I look for? Should I maybe start and look at, okay, first I need to figure out what IDP I'm going to use. Then I can integrate that with something like Tyke and build this, this access suite a little more easily. Any thoughts?
Yeah, thoughts, man. I could write a book. Yeah, so I mean, there's 2 different models. So there's things hitting the perimeter, or external APIs. That, because we're in the world of open banking, we're in that space where we've got very heavily regulated access models. So we're all, it's FAPI compliant stuff, so financial APIs. They've got a very explicit user and consent model that goes beyond anything that you would normally expect in a simple OAuth 2.4 or anything like that. So there's huge amounts more work and structure needed to control that. But where we've got things like Tyke in that space, the ability to layer the different authentication models is exactly the kind of thing we need to do. So you can stack them up, as Travis was saying. You don't just have to rely on one single thing. So we can have MATLS with the consent model, which essentially comes in as an access token or a JOT or whatever. Where we've found more challenge is the bank's insistence on taking industry standards and just basically just kicking them to bits and creating new versions of those things. So again, multiple layered technologies, separate authentication methodologies for front end and back end, so upstream and downstream operating in two different models. On the internal side as well, there's we've got a challenge between our configurable off-the-shelf platforms, so the things the bank has bought in versus the things the bank has built. So we've got a legacy platform set that's got much lower security models on it. They are using TLS rather than MATLS, or they're using, there's even some cases where there's just simple HTTP rather than HTTPS that all need to be looked at. And we've been working heavily with our security teams to make sure that we've got the right patterns and the right capabilities to make that space better. So we use the gateways, we use that environment to improve the landscape, to improve the capabilities, and to make things better as we go past. So we're not necessarily remediating the technical debt that exists in that space, but we're mitigating the risk and making it better going forward. But yeah, I mean, one of the major challenges we've had over the last 12 to 18 months is fitting in with the expectations of all the different consumers in the bank that want to use APIs and want to use API gateways. Everybody's got a slightly different nuance. So we've had to really nail down the use of patterns in that space to say, this is an approved set of standard ways of doing it. This is how you connect to the gateways. This is how the gateways connect and protect your endpoints. So hugely complex, but made a lot easier to deploy using these technologies.
Yeah, exactly. And I can agree with that as well. I think our biggest, in my 5 years of banking experience, the biggest challenge that we always had were those external integrations. So, if we had a some type of internal batch job that required some info. My last stint was actually with collections and working with a lot of different government agencies to pull stuff in. And yeah, being able to integrate. At one point, we were able to just basically create a proxy directly to an EBX mailbox, drop off some type of flat file, and then we would ingest it. But then as security standards changed, and I think it's even more strict within the European area of banking. But for us, we then had to refactor and say, okay, right now we're dropping stuff directly, proxying into the network, dropping stuff in an EBX mailbox. I don't know if you folks are familiar with EBX mailboxes, just file transmission in general. And then we had to look at revamping all this stuff as APIs. So getting that payload as basically a JSON payload, or sometimes even as SOAP, to be honest with you, for some of the older systems. And yet it's one of those things where it takes a lot of thought to be able to say, okay, we want to adopt, X security type of mechanism here and get away from this proxy, and then be able to talk to that third party and say, look, we know you don't support that right now, but we need you to be able to do this. So, and gateways definitely allow you to, on the side of the person who's building it out, allow you to build some of that stuff in more easily. You can kind of cherry pick how you want to do it. Gregor, previously, before, maybe you guys have always used a gateway, but was there ever a time where you would bake this stuff right into the code, or maybe do some homegrown stuff that gave you some type of hindrance to overall success of the projects?
Yeah, so I mean, the bank's been around since 1727, so it's had a few iterations of how to engage with external people. But so there was a lot of, I don't want to mention any other names, but there's legacy gateway type products that we've been replacing with Tyke, and there's sorry, what was the question again? I've kind of drifted off there a bit. Sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, right now you do have obviously some legacy stuff, but is there any legacy stuff that maybe not even at RBS, maybe previously that you've worked in outside of that, where, you would see something like, some type of security that's baked right into the APIs, which nothing wrong with that, a little tougher to manage overall, where you would see something baked into an API that you would think, hey, you know what, we could do that within a gateway and make that a little easier, more uniform.
Absolutely. So the bank engaged in a few years ago now, transformation towards the microservice architecture. And then what we want to do is to allow the developers to only have to focus on the business logic. And we move all the other stuff into different systems. So we still make sure holistically, end to end, we've got a very secure and secure by default process and an ecosystem. But the developers are doing the thing that's important to them. They're doing the business logic. They're doing the stuff that adds value to the business process. We abstract and obfuscate all of the authentication, all of the authorization, some of the policy enforcement points. We move on to the gateways, the threat protection, the quota management, the rate limit, and all the stuff that big ticket items that are on the big list of things why gateways are a good idea. We use that stuff, we put it on the gateways, to the point, even moving into the world now where we're talking to the developers about where they've got much simpler use cases. Why are we even bothering with microservices, right? Because we can build out virtual endpoints on the gateways, we can manage all that stuff there, and we can buy into all of the stuff that we've already got, the scalability, the resilience, the just the availability of the gateways themselves, rather than having to go and re-engineer different environments and different things to deploy that logic onto. So yeah, there's been a massive move away from these baked in things. There used to be huge monolithic applications, right, that were took a long time to update and develop, and they had really complex life cycle deployment models, and you were talking 9 months end to end to make a change on the platform because it's so large and complex, to all these decoupled microservices that work as a whole. And where we're trying to get our development community is into the headspace now of thinking about how we can reuse all of those microservices and move more orchestration back onto the gateway, so we can build more complex solutions piecing together all the things we've got, using loopbacks and call outs and webhooks and all that good stuff to build more capability on the gateway.
Awesome. That's exactly the answer I was hoping to hear. On that topic, maybe Taylor, maybe you could actually put up a poll. I'm actually curious to know, of the folks that are attending, are you using Type? Are you using something else? Or are you maybe not even using API management at all? I'm, as a developer advocate and a product evangelist, it's always nice to see who's showing up and kind of why and what kind of info. This allows us to, the next webinar that we put on, that hopefully you'll attend with us, allows us to be a little more targeted as well. Gregor, thanks again for the input. Is there anyone else that wants to jump in and give their thoughts on securing access to APIs? If not, we'll hop on to the next subject. I think these next few will be a little more opinion-based, and hopefully we'll have some people jump in and talk about them. All right, let's move on. So thoughts on compliance and maybe looking at it from a API management perspective of how we can use an API manager or an API gateway to really help to facilitate some of this stuff. So Keeping up with government regulations and compliance standards is crucial for creating a sustainable and profitable business. And as many of us know that have worked in finance, this is where the big fines come out and where we can actually, really come into some trouble here. Let's hear some thoughts. Travis, maybe you'd have maybe something from a compliance perspective that you could give us in the API management and type realm, and then we'll open up the floor to whoever else wants to chime in.
Yeah, absolutely. In the banking industry and in financial industry, it's very critical that you're able to choose tools that give you flexibility over where your data is being stored, because data sovereignty is a huge deal when it comes to the industry. So in terms of API gateways, it's going to be very important to know where can I deploy my edges to? Does my cloud provider, does my tool have a point of presence where I need it? Those are critical considerations when looking at API management. Can you put your edges where you need them? Because when it comes to data and sovereignty, like you said, it's a huge concern. And just choosing tools and cloud providers that give you the flexibility so you can have your data stored and transported where you need to is a critical consideration. And just speaking further to that, that's what I love about Tyke. With our cloud product, we have multiple clouds, multiple points of presence all over the world. So if you do have some stricter data sovereignty requirements, we have, you can deploy your edges in a ton of places so you can keep your data, within the confines of your country if that's what's required by the market in which you reside.
Cool. Yeah. Here's a question that may also kind of relate to this that we had come in. So what if the regulated financial institution or bank has poor/vulnerable APIs and end up blaming the fintech for the breach, and blaming in quotes? I mean, I'll kind of give my thoughts on it. The only way that you can really work against that blame would be the same thing, whether it's internal or external, and that is make sure that you have all your bases covered. When you look at, a little bit of chink in the armor, then at that point, that's where that blame opens up. And not to say that, that's right or wrong, but usually we always look to pass the blame as, not as developers, because we know how, technology can be finicky and nothing is ever perfect. But, a large FI may look to see where else the breach could have been. This has happened before within my experience as well, where we have a third party that gets breached, and next thing you know, a bunch of our data is also possibly breached, but we've been able to cover it from our side with maybe when we pass them data, we make sure it's masked correctly. When you look at, we had some third-party analytics tools that we were using that, all the PCI stuff was all masked correctly, and we were able to stop that from happening. So that would be, maybe a blame actually on the fintech or third-party side, where as a larger FI, we were able to kind of battle against it. I don't really have any experience being on the side of a fintech that would be, blamed for. I don't know if anybody else on the call might have some input on this. I'll reiterate what it is. So what if the regulated FI/bank has poor or vulnerable APIs and end up blaming the fintech for the breach? Not sure if there's any outside thoughts on that at all. Okay, well, I guess my opinion on it might be the only one that's out there right now. Any other thoughts on compliance and how we can use gateways? Yeah, being honest and communicating is the best policy. If we've learned anything in the last few years, breaches that people try to cover up usually don't end up well from a reputation perspective. I think it's definitely worse to try and cover something up, as we've seen with not even financial institutions, but we've seen, I know within Canada, we have a lot of third-party institutions, commercial institutions, meaning, I can't give any company names, but there might be a store that has an internal bank that had a breach, blah, blah, blah. And they make sure to communicate in that the best as they can. And they generally don't have too much loss of reputation, but the places that try and cover it up obviously definitely have some issues in the long term in terms of trust. So any thoughts on compliance and regulations and how API management, API gateways may be able to help within that? All right, that one's a little bit of a tough one. I will say that because compliance and regulations, especially, whether you're in the EU, whether in the UK, it's weird to say it separately. And then, or, you're in Canada or you're somewhere in APAC region, it's always going to be a little different. And I think it's a little tougher based on where you're at and what stage your company's at as well. Cool. Let's move to the next piece.
Sorry, Matt, can I just chip in there?
Yeah.
Just a really quick one. So my understanding of the regulated environment in the UK specifically is that the regulator takes a very strong view on the service extending out from the bank. So where the bank's consuming fintechs or part of that all it's all contained as part of the user experience, the user journey, and the underlying bank is still responsible for any breaches or any issues. So the banking regulator in the UK takes a really strong view on that there's the banks can't wash their hands and walk away from the responsibility just because the breach happened somewhere else. If it's part of their solution, if it's part of the thing they're offering to their customers, the bank is on the hook for it. So there is a bit of a glimmer of hope for fintechs. I think it's all part of making sure that the industry is moving forward and there's no barriers. Big banks, big financial services companies have got deep pockets and can generally weather the storm of these regulatory fines. Fintechs live or die by one of these breaches, right? They just can't cope with the financial burden. So yeah, the regulators are committed to moving fintech forward to get the right solutions to the hands of the consumers.
Oh yeah, very
now if I can chip in on that one as well.
Yeah, sure, Andrew, go ahead.
One of the things you can do, whilst you can outsource responsibility for delivering part of your application, whether that's be it next to fintech, you can't outsource your accountability. You have to have done your due diligence in working with that fintech and making sure they're doing the right sort of things, that you pass down that compliance regulations onto them and that they're following them as well. I used to work for Hitachi Capital, who are they're basically a fintech company. And then we had a very large compliance part of the organization, which made sure we were meeting all these regulatory requirements. And when we work with our third-party banking institutes that provide services with us, we made sure again that sort of shared responsibility model was there, that we understood what we were responsible for and what we were accountable for as well, and that they also likewise had the same thing on theirs. So I think it's nothing to be frightened of through compliance and regulation. It's something to be embraced and made to work.
Yeah, agreed. And going within that, so I know for us previously at the banks that I've worked for, when we do decide to onboard some type of third party, whether they're some type of non-fintech service provider or whether it's a fintech provider of any sort, it was up to us as a large institution to make sure that we had stuff in place, because when we think about banking, really the solution is holistic, right? If there's ever an attack against some type of vulnerable third party that may be exposing maybe a direct connection into the FI, or whether the data that the FI is sent out externally that should be protected is exposed, we need to make sure as large FIs or as fintechs, passing data both ways, that we have our bases covered and that we've done our due diligence to make sure that whoever's getting our data, or whatever compliance or regulations that the company is going to be using, our APIs or data, that we all adhere to that overall. Cool. Well, we've got 2 more issues to go through, and we've got 10 to 15 minutes to do it. So let's keep on trekking on. Thanks again for the folks chiming in with their opinions and thoughts. It's much appreciated. Okay, so this one is, these last two are a little opinion based, but I think it's important because we have lots of people here who may be just starting on the fintech journey, or maybe even just starting down the road of whether you're a side project, maybe you're getting funding, maybe you're part of a large institution. This is important in many different ways. So thoughts on scaling. Customer experience and business growth can be aided by properly planned scaling. And you can also kill your company by not scaling correctly. And this could be many things. This could mean, make sure you're scaling infrastructure correctly to make sure those bills stay down. Scaling in terms of, as we grow our product or API portfolio, how do we make sure that we keep everything in line and in check? And any other thing that you can think of in terms of scaling. I didn't go specific on this. I just want to know from a scaling perspective, whether it's any of those choices in between, what are your thoughts on making sure that as your business grows, or maybe as your products continue to grow? As we know, anyone who's worked with a big FI for sure knows that it's not very often that we have less applications in the stack. We usually have more. As much as there's tons of initiatives usually say, hey, can we take these 3 applications and boil them into one? Overall, the portfolio of applications and APIs tends to grow. So yeah, any thoughts on this, Travis, from the API management perspective? Anything from the CE side that you can see?
Yeah, absolutely. I think scaling is very important, especially when you're first starting an API management program. A lot of times these programs start very localized to a single team. So actual governance within the tool isn't a critical concern because it's such a small number of users actually accessing it. But what often happens is once this initial team has success, other teams within the business also want to adopt the product. So now you have a bunch of hands in the cookie jar. So the things that I think about are multi-team support, role-based access controls, things of that nature. So if we have a product like Tyke and we do very well with it in our team and want to expand that to other teams, can we do that in a way that we can stay organized and also, keep things separate? So I think this having those things in mind when you're choosing a tool is a critical concern to kind of keep in mind, just in terms of if you do have multi-teams or a larger organization and you do pick a single tool, does that tool have features and functionality to kind of support that future growth?
Yeah, agreed. I think that's, with my experience within startup stuff and doing my own thing, a lot of the times when it comes to actually initially building a product, you may pick the free tier of something, and I'm sure there's some people on the call that have done this. You pick the free tier of something, you bake that all in, and then when you actually get to scaling that and start to get some type of adoption, at that point you start to look at the bills rolling in and go, wow, I wish I would have thought of scaling from more holistically in the start. Does anyone else have anything to chime in on that? I see Andrew's already ready to give some feedback. Maybe I see he's off mute. So Andrew, any thoughts on scaling and maybe best practices or
Sorry, I didn't realize I was off mute. I was typing away in the background.
Oh, no worries. If you have a thought, go ahead. If not, I'll pass it over to Gregor.
Yeah, on scalability, I noticed certainly looking at TYK that one of the considerations for us particularly is latency. What we're dealing with is messaging. And when you're looking at voice and video, latency is, even its milliseconds can be interfere with that stream of traffic. And we have a number of fintechs that are using our technology, the likes of some of the banking institutions are using it. And so it has to be performant. And as you scale up, you need that sort of performance on demand. We've moved more into AWS for those particular reasons. So we've got close to the edge computing and keeping traffic within regions. And that all adds to that sort of reduced latency that we're looking for in it. So anything that's looking at API security specifically for us must have a minimal impact on that latency. So scaling up, is a very important issue for us.
Yeah, and I guess it's important for us to also mention from a type perspective. So we do have a component in our stack that you can deploy, known as MDCB, multi-data center bridge. And that also helps from a scaling perspective too, especially if you're looking at staying within specific regions, because then you can have, a master gateway. The terminology always escapes me. And then you have your edge gateways that you can also deploy to make sure that your traffic stays within those regions. So that also plays into the data sovereignty portion of things too, maybe from a regulatory perspective. But yeah, from a scaling perspective, the closer that you can have your gateways to where that traffic is actually originating from, is going to make things quicker. And when you think about, fintech, let's think about, maybe doing a transfer. It's okay if it's a couple seconds late from a personal banking perspective. But if you start to look at, securities trading and stuff like that, you need things to be wicked fast. So scaling and making sure performance is right at top of mind is quite important. Now, I do see some comments in the chat. I'm not sure if DF is from Tyke or from somewhere else, but they have some really good comments here. So Tyke can scale with the business. You can have gateways to front one service or a group of services. You can chain gateways, and when you want to put gateways at the edge near the users for authentication, and I think someone typed on the phone. And edge gateways near the service. Sorry, edge near the users, and OE gateways near the service, so you can use it to cache as well. Exactly. So you could put your gateways closer to the service to make sure you cache to kind of. I think one thing that we kind of keep in the front of our mind that we sometimes forget about is the fact that when we add another component to our stack, like a gateway, regardless of what brand or what companies produce that gateway, you're always going to have a bit of latency. Tyke's latency is extremely minimal, but you can even further reduce that by using some type of caching strategy, and that can also help with scaling. You can segregate services based on government restrictions across regions or in the same data center based on business needs. And that was DF. Oh wait, other gateways. Perfect. Were you typing on your phone? Autocorrect got you there. I was like, oh, okay, perfect. No, thanks for the input. Thanks you very much for the input. Oh, it's Yara. Awesome. Thanks, Yara. Thanks for mentioning that. Okay. Any other thoughts before we move on to our last little chunk, our issue number 5? All right, let's move on. Okay, lastly, thoughts on adoption. So this may not be fintech specific. We may have some other thoughts about what makes things easier to adopt. So we can think about an adoption in terms of, overall product. Maybe we have a product that we want to get users adopting and really gain up to that critical mass. Or maybe we have an API that we've just created and we want to have someone adopt that. Adoption is pretty wide topic. Gregor, maybe you could give us some insight on this. Let's say you have a new service that you've created internally. How do you go about internally trying to make sure that you socialize that with the right groups to maybe move them off of an old technology towards a new technology, or just your service is awesome that you just created, you want to actually get some adoption internally or maybe even externally? Any thoughts on that at all, about strategies around that?
Yeah, well, there's no one size fits all, right? It really depends on the service and who your customers are in that space. But on the whole, it's a hearts and minds thing, right? And it starts in a large, complex organization where you've got architects and design authorities and designers and solution architects, down to the developers. You can either build it from the ground up, you can go and build communities of practice, you can go and speak to developers that are doing it, you can explain the benefits of what's going on in this space, how it makes their life easier. You can push it down from the top, you can get into that enterprise architecture, sell the vision to them and move it down the stack and spread it out through the business. But ultimately, what you need to do is be able to prove how frictionless you're making the experience. how easy it is to use the new world, how easy it is to adopt these things, these APIs, and the ecosystem that goes around it. How much, by automating all this stuff, by building it into CI/CD pipelines and all that good stuff, how it accelerates the way the business operates. So yeah, like I say, it all comes down to the kind of heart and mind. Being able to show your developers a catalogue of published APIs that they can just go and consume, they can easily onboard to and start developing against, with full documentation against. I mean, that's the ultimate vision, right? That's where the really good solutions and results come from. And yeah, it's there's no silver bullet. Sorry.
You're right. You're right. I do like how you called out the organization as a whole, though, because previously as an architect, there is usually at large organizations and even medium sized, there is a huge amount of thoughts. There is a huge amount of thoughts and opinions. There's a huge amount usually of different ways to do something. I mean, usually when I would go and say something as simple as account retrieval, someone may say, hey, we have the best API for account retrieval. We pull from here, 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 and it aggregates all that data. And then I have someone else telling me, oh, ours is the best. So being able to really position your solution as, that easiest solution and also the most robust might be one way that internally you're able to force that adoption. Any thoughts on adoption from the APIM perspective? One thing I will mention, and Travis, you may mention this as well, adoption from an API management perspective, externally and internally, Tyke also has a developer portal, which may allow you to more easily onboard people, which the more easy it is to onboard, the easier it is to actually have people adopt your product. Travis, any thoughts at all?
Yeah, Matt, you actually make a great point about the inclusion of the developer portal. At Tyke, we do have a developer portal product that does come out of the box, but just speaking to a portal in general, it is a common interface that developers are accustomed to seeing. When we see a developer portal, feels like we're at home. So, and as long as the portal is robust, documentation, it's customizable, you can implement things like examples and things of that nature. I think it does make it easier for the development part of your organization to adopt a product. It's just one of those value adds that that often that you may not think about. You're used to buying separately, but your API gateway product can actually help in that regard as well.
Awesome. Very good. Okay. So lastly, questions or comments, and I just want to say a quick shout out to everyone who actually joined and chimed in. Hopefully some of you who joined and may join our next Tyke webinar, which we hope to see you at. Hopefully next time you'll also have some input for us, because we do really, really love to hear it. And the nice part is, we're all peers here. It's always great to kind of have this mind share where we're able to see different ways of looking at things or different ways of doing things. All right. Well, once again, thanks for joining. If you haven't used Tyke, you can reach out to me if you'd like, matt@tyke.io. Happy to kind of show you the path to getting started. Or you can go to our site where you can click our Getting Started link and you can try out a trial license and see how it works for you. And we're always glad to assist you with that as well. All right, so 52 minutes in, and we are going to say goodbye to everyone. Thanks again for joining, and hope to hear from you soon, and hope to see you at our next Tyke webinar.